heard we have a lot of first timers on this call. We're really glad you're here and excited to share learnings with you. So just to get started, Kathy, this we don't want to take this for granted in terms of like understanding what technical role actually means. So can you just kick us off with what an explanation there? What do we mean by hiring for technical roles?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. I think sometimes people don't even like the word technical, but I think here, just to kind of set the stage, we're talking about roles where there's some code or data component to them. So it could be engineering, could be data, AI, machine learning, folks where people are touching the keyboard, thinking, building out models where people are building part of the product. I think there's a lot in common with hiring for technical and non-technical roles, and happy to talk about what's the same, what's different, I think.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Let's get right into that, right? What is the same when you're hiring for technical and non-technical and when you're not?
Yeah, so I think actually most of it is the same. So for folks who are coming from a non-technical background, they don't consider themselves software engineers or data folks, there might be a lot of like imposter syndrome, worry about hiring for folks coming from these technical backgrounds. But actually, I would say I think a lot of the hiring and scoping of the roles is very, very similar, especially as the tools and techniques used to do things like sales, marketing, product, operations are also changing a lot. So maybe 5, 10 years ago, folks in sales or marketing or product were not using a lot of complicated tools, but now it's like the tool landscape for every kind of role has really exploded. And so if you're hiring folks into whatever roles in background that you've come from, probably they ended up using a lot of different, even for things like product, there's Confluence, there's Notion, there's lots of different things out there for tracking things, for building stuff. And so I think when you're assessing folks for their skills, there's a lot in common about how you assess for technical skills or skills for other roles. And when you're assessing people for their like interest and ability to be productive in a startup environment, there's a lot that's the same. And I think when you're assessing folks for culture, for how much they're going to fit into your team, what they're going to add to your team, there's a lot that's the same.
Um, Really interesting. I think that last point you made is a really important one about culture, right? Culture fit. I think we could sort of throw these terms around, but to get really grounded in it, I think, we invest really early stage. And we always say the first hires are so vitally important, right? Um, can you talk a little bit about how you've seen early hires make a difference in either actually both directions, right? Like, do these,
Yeah.
my guess is these take common shapes.
Yeah.
So can you share some there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so when you're thinking about hiring a first technical team member to an early stage company, maybe it's a CTO or a director level leadership hire, maybe it's like, I think a lot of times people are hiring for this founding engineer, founding data scientist, founding person who's going to drive both the implementation of the first things that you're building and the strategy, what we could build, of all the things we should be building, what could we build? And so I think a lot of the focus on those initial hires can be on the skills that the person has to build, which are obviously really important. But in addition to that, because we're thinking early stage, that person needs to be a person who will also be able to build the team on them. So thinking about extremely strong cross-functional communication. If they're choosing from all the things you could build, to narrow it down, they need to know what is the product, how are the other teams working, what are we trying to do here, and that requires really good requirements gathering from other teams. And they also need to be a good communicator back. Here's what I'm doing, here's what I think we should build, here's how long it might take, here are the trade-offs. So communication is extremely key for early stage folks, and also that ability to kind of interview, hire, sell the team to other people who might join engineering data and explain what's exciting about the company, why they chose to work there, what the challenges are ahead, how people might grow in their careers. So I think finding someone early who is a great communicator within the team and externally if you have that person, they're able to build the org around themselves and be thoughtful about who they might even hire in above them as a future leader. If you don't have a person who has those skills, often in an early stage company, even if someone's like very skilled technically, they might struggle a lot with figuring out like, oh, I'm kind of building in this direction, but I didn't check in to figure out if the company is going in a different direction, or I'm really heads down on this one thing and I don't have time to interview, or I'm not super interested in sourcing or something. But then when people come in to interview and they meet that person who's kind of maybe on their office on their own, it doesn't set the tone for excitement, for getting people really excited about joining. And obviously, if you want that founding engineer to kind of grow the team around them, they need to also bring that excitement.
Yep. Um, Fascinating. That it seems like a lot, right?
It
Like
is a lot. It's
it
true.
is a lot, right? But the bar part of how I hear what you're saying is the bar has to be high because
Yeah.
what we need to do, what we need to achieve is so great that if you're not um, doing doing proper, vetting and really taking the time to get to know the candidates you're hiring, to get to know, their capacities beyond their technical capacities, then you're probably making it harder for yourself in the long run.
Yeah, and I know we're talking about specific strategies. I think putting in those early stage hire requirements, curiosity, like how is this person curious about what the company does, about how we might move forward, and how you can test for that in interviews. One of the ways is like as the person progresses in interviews from a first screen to a second, maybe the first screen is with someone in recruiting, or if you're early stage, whoever is starting with the first screen, probably not the manager, but maybe. And then the second screen, even if it's with the same person twice, you're maybe a team of two, and you're hiring for this role. From the first screen to the second interview, um, how do their questions about the company progress to the next stage, which might be like an on-site? We can talk more about interviewing later, but
Yep.
like how are they asking better and better questions at each stage? Not just do they have any questions, but are they asking good questions? And are the questions showing an even increased understanding of the sector that you're working in, what you already have and what you're trying to do, what the team is like, how you hope to grow?
Mm,
A person, even in an engineering, data technical role, should be asking really good questions.
yeah.
Will show that they're a fit for working in an early stage company.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'll share a little bit from my experience hiring at Replit and Airbnb, particularly technical talent. So one thing, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. So one thing that I required for applicants was that they had a portfolio. They had, and the portfolio can take different forms, right? It can take the shape of a blog, a single blog post, right? It can be something that they wrote on Medium, right? Like the format actually doesn't matter. It's basically what I was looking for was evidence that they can form an argument, right? That they can convince me, not just of the technical details of what they built, but ideally the business implications, right? So I'm curious if you've seen other folks do that. I think it's definitely sets a bar in terms of who applies, right? Because you require something like that, and the numbers get smaller, but ideally, um, the quality is a bit higher.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's a good question whether you want to include that as the first stage as part of the application or whether you want to do something like that in the interview process. If you include it as part of the first stage, you can lower the numbers, especially for folks who are currently employed, who
Mm,
are pretty busy, who maybe work at companies where they haven't been able to share a lot of their work. People are, NDA'd and they can't necessarily share their code or results. I think folks often will have some kind of side project or a way to publicly talk about their work. Not everybody has that. So I think if you
yep.
require it in the application at the application stage, it can add a tremendous amount of information, both about interest in applying and the type of person who's going above and beyond to provide that additional resource. So you might want to add another or share a box where then you can say like, or if you don't have any publicly available work, what's something else that the person could provide. So it could be like a paragraph where you say, describe a piece of your past work and how it's relevant to our mission.
Yep.
So it's like, and then that way it's like, okay, if a person just is unable to share publicly their work, having a chance, and I bet most candidates won't fill out this part. Even if you ask a 1 sentence question, I like to ask a 1 sentence like, please share a bit about why you're interested in this role at company X. And
Yep.
like a lot of people just don't fill that out. And I think that's a pretty, or
Yep.
the, put like NA or something and skip ahead. And I think it's not good. That's not good.
Yep. Yeah, I liked how you talked about sort of laddering what you ask of candidates. Really looking for more nuance as the process goes on. At Airbnb, when we were hiring for the data team early on, we didn't require a blog or anything, but by the last step was a presentation, right? It was a presentation to a cross-functional team, um, right, to really demonstrate the ability to not just communicate the work that you did, but convince a cross-functional group of folks that you would bring value to the team. So
Yep. Yeah, I
um,
think having some sort of communication is really key. And I think at an early stage, I have been there myself for sure, that you just want to sometimes make things go more quickly. And if someone comes in, especially highly recommended by a friend or a colleague, you don't want to waste time in the interview process. You want to get an offer out quickly. And when you cut stages from the process, what I noticed personally, what I would miss when I would try to move more quickly is that the delta between the first time they learn about the company and the
mm,
role, second time and the third time. So I would really encourage people not to go below 3. The first thing can be a very short fit screen, which is like, do you know what this job is? Do you know where it is? What's your salary band? What's your
right.
location requirement? And say like, okay, great, we want to get you into the next stage, which could be a manager screen, which could be 30 minutes or something. And then, but I do think going less than 3 touch points, you really start to lose, it can be tempting. Like I met this person and they're so great and I want to move forward, but I think you miss the chance for them to show their ability to gain more information through the process and impress you with the level of understanding and questions they have about the business by the end when you cut stages.
Yeah. Um, One thing that brings to mind for me is, can you share um, mistakes that you see founders, early teams make, particularly in hiring folks from big companies coming to startups, right? And big companies here can mean a lot, right? It can
Yeah.
mean anything from Google size to Airbnb to more than 5, 10 people. So what are the, say, top sort of 3 things, mistakes that you see, or things that don't translate,
Yeah.
right, from big company experience to small?
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen this too, Lindsay. I think first one is just being like too impressed with brand names. Like, oh, if someone's worked at a FANG company or now it's a Mango, like if someone's worked at one of these companies, like they must be just like, we have to try to get them at all costs. We have to try to pay a lot. We have to lure this person. Same thing for schools, like very top schools. People get too caught up in the brand names. And also, early stage, you want to have investors, you want to impress them, you want to put like hired person from company X or school X. Um, and I think using it as too strong of a filter, if you only focus on those things, you are missing out on potentially great applicants. So I would say like try not to be too wowed by the brand names. That's like thing one. Thing two is really digging into if the person has any understanding of what early stage companies are going to be like. It's like, so you've been at a big company, it has a lot of structures, a lot of process, roadmaps, you're thinking far ahead. A startup is different. Here's where we are, here's what we know, here's what working with us would be like. um why are you excited about that? Like, why are you doing this? And you want to hear from them something like, I've been following a lot of companies. I've been following the journey of different teams. Friends of mine have done it. My partner, like, oh, I'm really like looking to move away from like super slow structured something to a more fast pace, something like that, because I think that you want to hear that they know what they're getting into a little bit. I think that's the second thing. So just really digging in on why they're interested in
Yeah.
startups, seeing if they have some understanding. And the third thing I would say is, like in the onboarding process, if you don't think things are going well soon, giving like very quick feedback, first weeks, 2 weeks in, like, hey, having a kind of a 30, 60, 90-day set of goals for your new hire and checking in on that really carefully. Like at 30 days, have they really gotten to 30 days? Are there good reasons why not? At 60 days, are they ahead? And giving feedback to say, hey, we're not on track, and potentially having to fire the person if they're not a good fit, because if especially if they come from a good school, come from a good brand name, you kind of maybe talk them up to your investors. It can be really like heartbreaking to have to let that person go. But if they thought startup life was for them and it is not, like parting ways sooner than later is really important, I think. And that might be really difficult, but just kind of making sure that the judgment you made and bringing the person on board, coming from bigger stage companies to early stages, it's actually for them.
Yeah, and I think that was great. There are a couple takeaways there for me. On that last point, I do think in startups and startup hiring, we need to normalize more and more um, uh, firing people when things aren't working out. And as you said, sort of the faster, the better. Now, I think what needs to accompany that is ownership. We talk a lot about how we look for candidates that have a high degree of ownership.
Yeah.
The company also has to have a high degree of ownership in terms of what they're committing to their early employees, right? In terms of that feedback, in terms of um, maybe not creating too many processes, but making particularly onboarding processes,
Yeah,
clear. And maybe we can get more into like successful onboarding
for sure.
um, later. I know we have a bunch of questions. Well, let's jump to building talent pipelines, right? Which is such an important thing in hiring. I worked on growth teams for years at Airbnb, so I'm always thinking in terms of funnel, and like upper funnel is always really exciting to me because where the big numbers are.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about how companies, particularly early stage, should think about brand, right? And how they can build their brand to attract quality candidates. What does that look like? What are some strategies that have worked?
Definitely. So I worked with a lot of teams on this when I was at Insight, working on the Insight Fellowship, and in our work at Fieldwork. People always are asking, like, how can I compete with these big brand name companies for hires? And I think the best way to compete is on specifics. So the more specifics you have about what you're doing, the better people can kind of see if they are a fit, because there is no best job, there's no best candidate. It's really about fit, right? So when you're very specific in your job description, in your job post, in the the things you provide in the interview process about what you offer candidates the chance to get to know you and find out if they're a fit or not. So specifics could look like not just listing a set of skills in the job posting and a job title, like engineer, going to build stuff, use Python, like a bunch of tools, a bunch of like a description. If it comes from ChatGPT, it's going to look like everything else. What you want to share is more about your company. Our company is doing this exciting thing. That's why we're doing it. More about the role. We're hiring this role to meet these specific challenges that we have at this moment. It's going to be exciting for these reasons. More about the person. We want someone who has experience with this, is interested in this. And then maybe here's what the first few months of working with us would look like. Here are the first projects you would tackle. That lets a person who's applying know, like, okay, here's what I would actually do. A lot of engineering and data roles are super general, saying in the job description what the person could actually work on and build. At an early stage, they must be doing something really important or you wouldn't be bringing them on. Being clear about what's exciting about it. And then maybe even like, here's what our interview process is like. The first call is with this person, the second call is this. The more detail you can share, the more a person who's looking at that description can be like, this is me. And the more they can then tailor their application to show you that they are the right fit. The other thing I think is always great is having any information available about the company. So whether it's a website, it's a blog, it's videos, it's things that people can do to learn more about what you're doing, that can really help candidates also say like, okay, I think I understand what this company is about and why I might want to be a part of it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that last point in particular really resonates. I mean, I've seen companies like Linear, right? Linear, um, they have something called the linear method, right? The linear method is not something that existed in the world and they harnessed. It's something that they created, right? And I think for their brand, um, they're a very unique brand. But the way they become a unique brand is by statements like that, right? And I think that sometimes, particularly early stage founders, can be intimidated, like, well, what do I have to say, right? Well, you have a lot to say. You're creating a company, something from nothing. You've raised money from investors who have really high conviction in what you're doing. Like, we want to hear how you think about problems, how you think about building software, how you think about building teams, even. I know when I was at Airbnb, we were really encouraged to contribute to Airbnb's technical blogs, but also more general blogs. And those blogs were the number one source of applications to the company because exactly as you said, like
Yeah.
you can do it in a job description or someone can read like how you thought about a problem that you're working through and think, oh my gosh, I can see myself there, right? And I think we tend to undervalue things that seem obvious to us, but us who are working at the companies, but for folks who are, you're trying to pull away from jobs, like the more that you can share, I think the
Yeah.
better.
And I think also that it's not true that you're probably competing with the same, like with a big company for startup. Like someone who wants to go to a big company probably doesn't want to go to startup. And so like if they're applying to, if they're like, oh, and if they're kind of casting a wide net because they're trying to figure out what they want, like it's not a
Mm,
red flag if someone applied to Google, Facebook, whatever. But it is, I think like a person who's going to go to one of those jobs will probably wants more structure, is okay with slower timelines. They think about impact in a different way, maybe making a small change for a larger number of people. If someone's going to come to work in an early stage company, they want to have impact, like an early stage in the product itself and the way it's built. They want to work with a smaller team. They probably want to work on faster timescales. They're interested in growth, like, and they're okay with risk. And that's just like a different person than a person who's probably going to
yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, Another question here is around, we talk about communication and branding. I also consider kind of what do they call these? Work trials, a form of branding. So before I was an investor, I interviewed a number of places, over the years. One was Linear, and Linear has a kind of famous 4 or 5 day work trial where you get compensated at a level, appropriate to if you were a consultant. I spent 4 or 5 days embedding with their teams. It's pretty intense. Uh, I personally think that work trials are an incredible two-sided experience, right? You're vetting each other. They do take a lot of time, though, right? You can imagine that they um, may be easier for certain candidates. Do you have any preferences or experiences there you want to share?
Yeah, and actually there's a question in the chat about this too. Try before you buy, project work before a full-time offer. What do you do about people who already have jobs and they don't have time to do
Yep.
this? So very similar kind of, and I think I personally think that if you have a chance to work together, if there's any chance to work together, if it works out for the company and for the candidate, I think it's great because I think people are like, even though there's tons of candidates and it's a good market for employers, there's lots of people looking for lots of reasons. I do still think that candidates are, especially really good candidates, are quite picky about like, what's the team going to be like? What's my day-to-day work going to be like? What's the
Yeah,
company do? How well structured is the company? Like, and so getting a chance to work together in one of these kind of trials or on a project or in a contract to hire sort of basis, I do think it benefits both sides as long as it's like well executed. I think I don't want to do a bunch, ask someone to do a bunch of work that's unpaid, not cool. When you do add a kind of a challenge, a coding challenge or data challenge or something to the interview pipeline, you do see people drop off who are employed, don't have time to do it. If it's like going to take them, also, if you say it should take you 4 hours, then
yeah,
people know that they should spend 2 days on it, probably, if they're going to be competitive. I wouldn't suggest that, but I do think any way that you can kind of co-work throughout the process is valuable. And if you don't have time or ability or interest to do like a work trial or contract to hire, having something like people working on a project and making a presentation or presenting on previous work and going into some significant detail is a good way to get that. And if you have an opportunity to do some work or contract to hire and the candidates are up for it, I think people right now are flexible on different processes. And I think at an early stage, you don't have like a ton of HR history about ways to do things. So you can try things. If you have
totally.
candidates say like, hey, we really like you as a candidate. We're doing a thing where we do a 6-week trial or a 1-week trial and it's paid. Uh, we want to do that with you. We're thinking about that. Are you up for it? And the person's like, no, I only want a full-time hire. Then you can make a call like, do I want to go? And then there's always this period where if it doesn't work out, you should part ways anyway. And so
Yeah,
you say, okay, you're a full-time hire. And then you have to go through the process of letting them go if it doesn't work out. It's like, I think you're in an early stage, you can try stuff and see what works for you.
yeah. I think that's so critical, right? In every startup is this attitude around experimentation, right? Everything you do should be an experiment, right? And it's kind of weird to say that out loud, but if you're not constantly gathering data, reflecting on the data, taking lessons away and changing, then you've either figured it out from the get-go, which is rare, or maybe you're a little nervous
Yeah,
about
and I
things.
think it's all about doing it in a way that feels transparent and good to the candidate. I think if you're having a good candidate experience and you're like, hey, we haven't done this before, but we'd like to try doing a co-working period of some time, 1 week, 6 weeks, 3 months.
Yep.
I think that's good, and you can say it transparently. I think what you don't want is like a candidate goes through a thing and then they get the feeling from you you're not sure about them, and it was advertised as a full-time hire the whole time, and then they end up
Mm,
and you're like, instead of getting an offer, they're getting like this different offer, and they're like, this all feels kind of fishy and disorganized to me now.
mm,
I'm kind of out of here. And so I think, maintaining a good, like being clear about what you want up front, being transparent if it's something that you're trying, making it so it doesn't feel like it's about them. Like,
yep.
oh, we're not sure about you, so we're going to do this
Right.
thing. Being like, oh, this is a thing we think would be valuable for both of us. Are you up for it? I think it would.
Yep. Yeah, yeah. And to be clear there, experimentation is not within candidates, but
Yeah,
over
yeah,
the process over
exactly,
time.
exactly.
Yeah, that distinction I think is important. Yeah, and for what it's worth, when I was running my startup, all of our hires were contract to hire. And I found that worked well, particularly with folks who were coming from, larger companies. They knew that they were thinking about their next move. They probably had a lot of options, and setting things up in a two-way evaluation process. Really, I think that's takes some flexibility, but it did work well for us because we got to know each other really well. Got to know each other really well, and the integration was good. Um, awesome. Let's transition within here to building diverse technical teams, and diverse can mean so many things. I At Airbnb, I was early Airbnb data science. I was I think the 27th data scientist by the time I left. We were 200, uh, or nearly 200 data scientists at one point. We spent a lot of time thinking about what diversity meant to us and how to sort of build and evolve talent pipelines and processes. It certainly took a lot of work, and one way we did that, one way we put this into action was just having a lot of flexibility in terms of where we sourced candidates from. Take homes. We actually had timed take homes, so it was literally a 4-hour take home, and you would get it from the recruiter and have 4 hours, right? So everyone had the same timeline. It fit well with folks in various life circumstances. But I'd love to hear more from you, right, on building diverse teams and strategies that you've seen that have worked and not worked.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I think it's super important. I think it really improves the work, improves the team, improves your ability to hire in the future when you start from a diverse team. If you hire the first few people and they're all kind of alike in whatever way, then when you try to hire for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, or the next, from 27 to 100, if you show up and there's like 27 dudes and you're a lady, you're going to be like, I don't know if this is for me, maybe. And so I think just kind of as you go, as you build your company, thinking about like ways in which people, if it's starting to feel kind of samey in your team and your candidate pool, like what are ways that you can expand out? I know one engineering team that was mostly male, when they hired a person to work with them, a recruiter, they were like, we want you to just really focus on female candidates to the extent, it's like when you're going through LinkedIn and you're messaging people, like, we want to build a more diverse team. Can you help us by doing outreach to specific kinds of candidates that are going to fill gaps in what we need? And so I think, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, if I can jump in there. I mean, I have noticed when you ask people to do that, they didn't even notice they weren't doing it before, or
That's
that
right.
like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I didn't even notice that I have never sent you a female candidate.
Right. Exactly.
Which
All these guys
it's
are
not
white.
any
Like,
it's not any ill intent often. It's just like, wow, my networks and top company networks and things like that sort of lead me to produce more of the same. So raising
yeah.
it is
Yeah.
important.
And I think just kind of calling it out, like, and just saying like, oh, hey, these candidates are so similar. It could be other things too, like schools. Like I know one very big data team, they just got so indexed on like hiring from 3 schools that they were putting themselves kind of into like a bad pattern where they're hiring from these same schools over and over, and then they're just paying these salaries because everyone else is looking for the same schools, where it's like, oh, if you would just even ignore the school in your search, like you could get yourself a more diverse set of candidates who also maybe are looking at a different set of salary ranges, right? So there's lots of reasons to do it. So I think number one is on outreach, and number two, it's like what you're saying, Lindsay, it's like examining your list of, okay, here's all our candidates. I don't think it's a good idea to necessarily mandate certain like quotas in the hire, like, oh,
Yeah.
we can't hire for this role until we hired.
Yep.
But I do think when people do that, the evidence is that it works, like absolutely. And like, so I think making sure that as you're going through things, you kind of catch yourself at an early stage. And the thing I think I would warn people about who are hiring early is like, you can get yourself into a situation that's much more difficult to fix. Like if this kind of thing, if you're like 10 and you're like 10 white people or 10 guys, like you're just really like people are going to show up and be like, oh, this isn't for me. And so I think making sure that at every stage of the process, you're kind of examining your pool, making changes, reaching out to, there's lots of different kinds of community groups, reaching out to different, like different Slacks, different LinkedIn groups for like women engineers or whatever it is that you're missing. Like just trying to correct problems early can prevent them from growing. And it might feel like in the early days, you're kind of like, oh, like I'm just hiring the best people or the first people that my highly recommended network, and we'll fix this problem later. But I think it's much more difficult to fix later.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's important as well, as you point out, that this can take so many different forms, right? It's not just gender and race and things like that, but personality styles, communication styles. There was years ago a study, I think it was at HBS, that was talking about hiring like top talent across the board can often take one shape. right? And it's usually like extroverted and top achieving. And it turns out when you get a team full of that sameness, they don't usually perform as well. And I think they did a study on like the best chickens, and at the end of the day, the chickens killed each other because they were like they're all competing for the same thing.
Yeah.
I'll send a link to that
Yeah,
old
and one
Facebook
more
that she
quick
has.
note I want to say about diversity is even if the very small team, a very early team, giving folks some coaching on like what's okay, what's not okay during an interview. Like if you're chatting, saying here's a couple set of questions. If we're gonna have lunch with a candidate, here's some questions that are great to talk about, like past work, things they like, hobbies they have, whatever. Here's some things that are not great. Like, where do you live is actually not a great question to ask someone because it might reveal information.
It's
Like,
actually
live
illegal.
it, it's illegal. It's
Yeah.
definitely illegal. And I think at a small stage, no one's gonna necessarily like it's unlikely to be litigated at that stage, but it is illegal. Like, do you have kids? Like, not an okay question for an interview. And so just I think as the leadership team, showing that you care about this stuff, giving
Yep.
people a list of like instead of kind of like coming, don't do this, giving people
Yep.
a list of like, here's some great things to talk about with candidates that are totally reasonable and will help us assess if they're, want to join our team. Here's some stuff
Yep.
that's like not okay to ask about in an interview.
Definitely.
It's like actually illegal.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think it is important to go back to that the ownership that the company takes over its processes and planning, right? And doing it's very helpful to set people up for success on both sides. Um, let's do one more question in sort of this theme around pipelines. Um, and then move on to actually we're kind of weaving in and out of interview questions. We always hear startups need entrepreneurial early hires, right? Particularly folks who thrive in ambiguity. How do you vet that in particular?
Yeah. I love this question. I think number one, in the application stage, looking for like other stuff. The person like led a nonprofit group to do a cool thing. They were the person who like took their lab's software and made it open source from their biology background. They're a person who like just has hasn't did a crazy backpacking thing where they hiked the Appalachian Trail. Like think projects, like a person who likes a project, that number one committer to Ravelry knitting, something. Like whatever it is, they're a person who likes a project. I think that's important.
Mm,
I think being quantitative in the results from their previous work. So somebody who can tie back to business objectives, like I'm an engineer who built a thing and it helped us gain customers or revenue or something.
hmm
Like, what was the result of your work? Because I think you want somebody who's motivated not by like getting a to-do list of things to do and they did them, but a person who is like, I understand the impact my work had, and that's part of the reason I was driven to do it, and I can communicate about it. So
hmm
like I've heard somebody say a resume could be replaced with a like describe your top 3 projects or something. And so if you think of like the resume as like top 3 projects, do you see a couple pieces of impressive work? And again, this goes to like this is true across any role. Like, has the person done some relevant work and are they able to describe it? I think being able to tie back to business value to the results of the work is super important. And then in the interview process, I think somebody who has this kind of entrepreneurial spirit, again, is going to ask super relevant, good questions about the business and the work that they're going to do there. How does my work tie into the value?
mm,
And is going to be like a good and generous communicator. I was think like, they're not going overtime. They're not just talking about one thing kind of heads down. They're able to be interrupted and asked a question
mm,
is a really good
mm.
interview signal, I think. Like if they're a technical person whose red flag might be like they're kind of going on and on and on about some project that they worked on, and you want to kind of jump in and be like, oh, hey, I just wanted to ask though, like, what is that tool? Or
Yeah.
the acronym or that thing that you're not defining. And if they're able to be interrupted and be like, oh, yes, sorry, SDQP is actually the thing that we use to measure something, something, like that's a good sign. If they like seem annoyed that you're asking a question, if they seem condescending that you're asking a question, if they seem like, oh, you don't know what STQP is, like that's very bad because that's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
they're in their own world and they're not um being that kind of curious
Yeah.
operator that you
That,
need.
yeah, I think that's a great example. Yeah, it's a great thing to, I think, build a
And if
practice to bring into.
And if you're not coming from the same background and you're feeling too nervous to interrupt them, that's also a bad sign. Like if you're bored, if you're being made nervous, like you're going to be this person's collaborator and they're bringing a skill that you don't have. Like you need to be able to have like a really good back and forth. Like, tell me about that thing. Why was it important? What tools did you use? What trade-offs did you make? And if they're not like enjoying that discussion, if you're not enjoying that discussion, like it's a bad sign.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I really like that. I like that as a hack in interviews in general. Interrupt people and see how they respond.
Yeah, it's great.
Really. Wow. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Okay,
And
awesome.
now you'll notice it forever, Lindsay.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah. Well,
it's a good one.
yeah, well, I was going to say I'm definitely good at interrupting, so I need to start getting feedback on that. Awesome. Let's continue with interviewing. It looks like we might have time for one or two more. So let's do one interviewing question, and then we actually have one from the crowd that I'd like to get to. So, okay, core elements of a well-structured technical interview period rather than I feel like we've talked a lot about interview process, right? Like guiding folks through, but like an actual technical interview, what are the, 3 to 5 things that like we need?
Yeah. So many people do this in so many ways. And I think let me try to just like to sum up in a couple key points. Um, Evaluating past work is really important, not just live coding or current, like in the interview process. So getting someone to really describe their past work and the trade-offs that they made in their
Mm,
past work, whatever it
mm,
was. Not just like you're not checking a box like they used tool X, they used tool Y, but like why did they choose that? What were the other options? And for anybody who's hiring, anybody in engineering data, technical role should be able to walk through trade-offs. And if they
hmm.
can't, then they're like too much like, oh, I only ever use this tool because that's the tool to use. Maybe I think it's the best tool. Maybe it's the only one I know. I didn't evaluate other options. That's not like a early stage leader, general person you want, someone who can talk through trade-offs and past work. That's one thing.
Yep.
The next thing is like this kind of like relevance to the current work. So that's where I think people usually design some sort of technical interview that tests the current work in an offline or live way. And I think both can be okay as long as you're skilled at running those interviews. And it could be a take home sort of thing, or it could be like we're going to do something together where we have some sort of data or code and we're going to look through it. Another thing I've seen that is a take home that is a good way to assess this kind of skill is in like a code review. So like here's
Mm,
kind of the code like what we are doing in our company. What review would you give? How would you, where do you find mistakes? What would you write on here? Because doing code review is a practice that experienced people should be able, and giving some like understanding, like giving them some kind of picture of what the day-to-day work would be like, and having a rubric for
mm,
grading those
mm.
kinds of take homes or live things that says like, here's what good looks like, here's what it doesn't look like. And that again can help with bias. If someone's like, oh, I just didn't think they were that good. Like, well, what was it? If they if they catch these things or miss these things, having a way to build a
Yep.
rubric. And if those things are not in your current wheelhouse, figuring out who from your team or who from your network, whether it's friendly investor, whether it's mentor or advisor, whether it's someone that a friend that you bring in, or this is something that we do for teams, like having somebody who can evaluate those skills. There's also products that do this. Like Carrot is one, a Byteboard is another. Having some way to think about like who does this evaluation and what are they looking for? I think just again being very specific, like what do you need the person to do? What's the rubric that you're going to grade them on? And can they communicate about the work? It's a little all over
Hmm.
the place, but does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot, right? We need to set up and we need to get right. I think your point about leveraging, angel investors, institutional investors, is a great one. Don't be afraid to everyone, here to reach out and ask, how we can help.
Yeah, and the candidates will totally understand if they say, hey, we're looking to bring this skill onto the team, but we don't have this skill on our team yet. Most of the interview process needs to be conducted by the team that they're going to work with. But if one of the interviews is conducted by someone that's like, hey, this is our person, our advisor, our investor, who we trust to kind of help us hire on this skill, I think candidates are very
Yep.
receptive to that because they want to know that the team will also have resources for them. Like maybe
Yep.
that, especially if it's a person that they could work with in the future or learn from.
Yep. Yep. And I think also not being afraid to say, here's what I think we need. Let's sanity check that a little bit, right? Because if you're not an expert yourself, knowing what you need can be incredibly difficult. And if you get that wrong, then the downstream can be difficult. Okay, in our final moments, we got a great question, on on Zoom about vetting folks, like back channeling folks without like narking, or how do you handle that in a graceful way?
This means like just it's that like they're leaving their current job, but they don't want to let people know they're leaving their job. Is that
Or
what you
they don't exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yep.
Lindsay, you're my boss and I'm interviewing. Someone wants to talk to you, but you don't know I'm interviewing. Is that yeah.
Yeah. And you have, yes, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. Candidates who are currently employed are often really good candidates to hire. But it's true that you can't really ask their current manager. So I think I would two things you can do. One, you can go further back and just, try to find people that worked with them in the past, or you can ask, I think you can just ask the candidate to be like, hey, you mentioned that this is processes, that you haven't let your current team know that you're looking yet. Are there some other folks maybe on an adjacent team that you would feel comfortable reaching? Maybe it's not your manager, but it's like like a peer or some other person, somebody who works with you day to day in your current role that you would feel comfortable reaching out to. Because
Hmm.
they may say like, oh, I'm a lead software engineer and my manager doesn't know I'm looking, but this other co-lead that I work closely with
Hmm.
is is my friend and I can tell them, and I wouldn't have as big of an effect on my career if they don't know yet. But I also think probably the person should have more than one reference. So just finding like, okay, who are the other references? And then and then I think while references can be really valuable, if you're checking on these things that we talked about, which is like, tell me about your past work and the trade-offs that you made, and it's pretty heavy detail. Let's talk about the work you would do here and make sure there's a good fit with our current work, whether that's code or data or whatever it is. And you think this person's like a great fit for your team and is going to be able to build the organization and they're excited about startups. I wouldn't not make an offer based on not hearing from their current boss.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because I
Yep.
just don't think you're going to miss something like that,
If you do it well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Okay. And I was actually, wrong about the time. We have more minutes than I assumed. Let's hop to, competing with Fang or Mango,
Oh
I
yeah.
think you said.
The
Yeah,
manga.
yeah, I don't know. I have to vote on that. Um, yeah, share some effective strategies for competing with, companies that have they have a lot of money to offer candidates. They have a lot of responsibility to often offer them. They have a lot of, maybe ancillary benefits. Yeah, what do you have to share there?
Yeah, like all these technical things, there are trade-offs here too. So it's like, how good of a fit is the person for your position? How fast do you want to try to hire people? How much can you pay? And you kind of have to think about what is it that you have? What is your team's advantage? And it's like, do you have enough money that you want to try to match big salaries? Do you have some unique problems that you are like excited about people working on, and you can offer good culture, fast moving impact. Do you have like, can you wait for a while? You know, it's like if you can't pay as much, can you do your search a little bit longer and figure out like, okay, we're just going to keep trying to get good candidates as we go. So what is it that you have? And then I think again, like emphasizing the differences, the impact, like describing the work super clearly. Who else is on the team? Who will people get to learn from? What's the potential for the role, I think is a good one.
Mm,
Because I think when you mentioned at the top, Lindsay, like finding someone who has like good technical skill and great communication skills and interested in the business and like it feels impossible. But I think what you'll often find is people who um like on paper maybe are missing one thing, like they didn't go to fancy school or they didn't work at fancy other company, they are new, they're earlier in their career, um they got laid off and they've been looking for a while, like there's maybe
yep.
something that you might give you, it's like but then when you talk to them you're going to be like really impressed with their technical skill and their communication, their interest in startups. So I think in competing, it's really just about like understanding what you can offer and being really clear about what you do offer and what's different.
Mm.
And the
And
scope for impact and growth. Because in a bigger company, growth is always going to be slower. If you can tell people, hey, you know, if this goes well, startups, you never know, it's a risk. But if this goes well, we're going to be growing the team. You're going to be an early team member. Think about whether or not that person might grow into management responsibilities within a year. Tell them directly. If it's not an opportunity, that's fine. Tell them that. If it is an opportunity, be clear about it.
hmm hmm yeah, it's interesting. I'm reflecting on when I had left Airbnb and started at Iggy, and there's so many people, friends, colleagues at Airbnb who were like, I really just want to make more impact, want to go to a startup. And then I'd be like, great, I'm hiring. Uh, Now's your opportunity to make impact. And they're like, no, I actually, like I actually just want to keep the money's really good, right, at this
And it
place.
like can
And
be so different, right? And so then it's like, okay, well, let me know when you're ready for.
yeah, yeah, and I think it's really important to be honest about that on all sides, right? What startups, as you suggest, have to offer is so different from many of these established companies. This is a bit of a different tact, but um,
Yeah, actually, let me say one more thing about that, which is
yeah.
like remote versus in person too. Some people
Mm,
really want to be in person now. They're like, please, can I go to an office with 6 other people and get to be with people during the day? Other people are like, please, I need to be remote. That's what my thing is. I live in a cool mountain cabin where I just want to do software engineering. And so like
yep.
just being clear what you offer.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe more one level down from that. I found a lot of success um, in like a personal touch. So there's the job and the company, but then there's also like how are we closing candidates, right? And there are so many small things I think we can do that make people feel seen. They make them feel important, right? I say this with this. This is we think about this as investors, but as hiring managers as well, right? There's so many small things you can do, from writing personalized notes to taking people out to dinner to meeting their partner, right? A lot of people will say, I can't make this decision without my partner. Then great, it's my job to get to know your partner, right? And I think we often overlook those things, but
Yeah.
um, I don't believe in the like we work with family. We're building a company, right? But like that doesn't mean that we can't take relationships really seriously. So I'm a very strong advocate for whether we call it creative closings or a personal touch can really help in these things.
Yep. Yep. And I think for technical folks, for data and engineering folks, having worked with so many candidates and teams, I think like you can't underestimate the value of an organized process in closing
Mm-hmm.
these candidates, which
Mm-hmm.
is like, was it clear to me throughout the process what the role is? Was it clear to me when I talked to different people on the team that they had the same idea of what the role was? Was it clear to me when my next interviews would be or what the next steps would be? When I got the offer, was it clear that I have the offer and the terms of the offer? And so what I always like to do was do the email to make a phone call on the phone to say, I would like to make you the offer, and then like
Yep.
pause. Let them hear it and say, like, I want to walk through the details, and then I'm going to email you the offer right after this call. And then people get to hear from you directly, like why, say why you're making the offer, that you're
Yep.
so excited about your experience, blah, blah, blah. And then
Yeah.
right after that, send the written offer, so that people have it to think about with their family, with their friends, on their own, so that they can make a decision. And that kind of like execution success throughout the offer process can really help you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. We are brushing up on the end here. I'll give a second for anyone to add a final question that they absolutely want um, answered. And if none of those come in, let's see, final question that I have for you. What should we expect to change in the coming weeks, months, years in terms of hiring? How do
Yeah,
we
hiring, I will
future-proof?
say a lot of it's kind of a disaster with the AI bot sort of chat GPT-ish. Like a lot of job descriptions look like they're written by chat GPT. A lot of job applications look like they're written by chat GPT. So it's kind of like where you see for sales, people are inventing these new sales techniques, like take someone out to dinner. Don't just send them 100 emails. That I think that hiring and recruiting and scoping these roles with your team can also become like more, I think, err towards more personal than less personal,
Yep.
like
Yep.
less use of AI tools that'll give you kind of a middle of the road meh sort of thing, and more like thinking about what your company actually needs, who you want to bring on the team, using networks and references, like not to the exclusion of opening a job post and taking applications from anyone who wants to apply, but in addition to that, making sure you're meeting people in person, or on Zoom one-on-one, and finding like folks through personal touch, because I think that will really help you grow your team with folks that you're excited to work with, who are going to contribute
Mm-hmm.
a lot, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
kind of making the process more impersonal
Yep.
as we go. Because they'll just be like, right now people are getting hundreds of applicants for some of these roles. You're going to get tens of thousands of applicants. Like as
Yep.
people automate that application process, that's not good for anybody.
Yep. Awesome. Incredibly helpful to all of the founders on the call. Thank you for attending. If you have questions, feel free to find me on Founder Slack. Happy to follow up potentially with that chicken article I mentioned. Kathy's team helps folks with all sorts of technical challenges and implementations, including hiring. So thank you so much.